Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Yesterday they had a referendum voted on in Kurdistan, one little part of it, which is the one in Iraq. And they had a referendum against the wishes of the government. Many governments, there weren't very many governments that wanted this, even though this was an Iraqi Kurdish vote. And it looks like of the people who could vote, 78% turned out, and 95% of the people, 93.5%, something in there range, voted to be independent, to separate. And this makes a lot of people very nervous over there, because when you look at the potential and the theory of having an independent Kurdistan, you're involving a lot of countries. You're involving Iraq and Iran and Syria, especially Turkey and even Armenia. But then there's other people who are chirp in, and we're involved in the discussion and the support for this referendum. And that was the United States, believe it or not. All these countries I just mentioned, they have Kurds living there. You know, it's part of their daily problem and political system that they have to deal with. But the United States, you know, the logic would be, what are we doing there? But we were cheerleading, you know, against this referendum, as well as the European Union. Everybody has a stake. So it must be bigger than just a small group of people who have certain religious and cultural beliefs, would just like to be left alone. Who knows? There might have been commercial interests involved. There might have been strategic security interests involved. So it's a bigger issue, and it's been going on for a long time, because the Kurds have actually argued the case that they've never been given a homeland. They get pushed around, and they are a precise culture. And of course, my sympathies are always for less government and self-determination and who knows what. But it looks like the Kurds have been on the receiving end of individuals and countries in that region, as well as internationally. World War I, I'm sure, had an effect on this. So this could turn out to be a very significant vote. I imagine most Americans probably aren't too sure where Kurdistan is. So it'll be interesting to see what comes up what turns up from this election.
And in fact, we do have a map to give an idea of how widespread the issue is. Iraqi Kurdistan, you can see there, this highlighted. That's the region that voted for independence. But you see, particularly in Turkey, a huge chunk of the country. You know, if we could see the rest of the country, you would notice that it's probably looks like a third of the country. Then up there you see Armenia has a few patches, Iran has a good share, Syria and Iraq, obviously. So this is a broader issue, and it's also an issue that has been discussed many decades, probably since Sykes-Picot after World War I. However, it is interesting you talk about the outside powers involved, and I think what we almost need to do is separate the concept of independence, the concept of secession, the concept versus what's happening in practice. Because on the one hand, I think we would support the idea, as you say, the subsidiarity of breaking away. But there are outside powers that are involved and have been very involved in what's happening. And this stage goes back to the Iraq War.
Yeah, there's always an angle. It looks to me like the country and the leader of that particular country was the most upset was in Turkey.
Yeah.
They came down the hardest on this, and actually the threat to the Kurds here was that, you know, you benefit from oil coming out of here. But that's a little complicated too, because, you know, Iraq to some degree is still involved in that, the government of Iraq, and the Turks you know, allow this oil to go through. I don't imagine, maybe they use some of this oil and it goes to Europe and different places, but that was the commercial threat. But the other side of that argument is usually when you have commercial interests and both sides are dependent on it, it sort of helps them find another answer. But so often, you know, outside forces are too powerful. Then if the European Union's involved, the United States is involved, and everybody has an axe to grind, you know, the commercial interest can be diminished. But it remains to be seen exactly what will be a result of this, because I think it'll go on. It's been going on for a long time. This isn't going to resolve it, but right now I don't think in 6 months or a year all of a sudden there's going to be a new country that is recognized by anybody. And that's, it's sad that that can't happen, because I sort of like the principle of secession, in smaller government, and I don't like the United Nations involved dictating. And if the countries involved, those 5 or 6 countries, and all the real outsiders, the United Nations, the European Union, the United States, just should stay out of there, they might be able to solve this a little bit easier.
Yeah, and everyone in the U.S., everyone who's upset about this referendum, trying to have them call it off, they should also understand that this is caused directly by U.S. interventionism, U.S. interventionist foreign policy. The U.S. let the genie out of the bottle when it invaded Iraq in 2003, and they're trying to put it back in. The Kurds did get some autonomy in post-Saddam Iraq that Saddam would not have given them. And so now the U.S. is looking at a situation that it created through intervention, saying, well, hold on, we don't want this to happen. It's blowback.
I'm sure it wasn't an intended consequence. It was unintended, but some people might even say it's a little bit of blowback to come back, because it is haunting America's policies. It's changed the thing. It's made the relationship with Turkey a little bit rockier. And, of course, our intervention, the intervention in Iraq is a significant event that helped contribute to this problem. But what about our interference in Syria? Once we decided that Assad had to go, then we invited the Kurds to pick sides. The Kurds, maybe they can fight ISIS. Oh no, we don't want to fight ISIS too strong, because we need the Kurds to fight Assad, and maybe we should wait on that. So it really confused the politics over there. But it's our intervention in Iraq and our intervention that's ongoing in Syria all contributes to this, and it never suggests to anybody, well, maybe we should do less of this. I never heard that statement except from a few of us. In Washington, most of them are saying that you have to be strong and tough, and use bombs. And I see the other day that we resumed bombing in Libya. Drop some bombs in Libya. Hardly do I think that's good diplomacy.
Yeah, and this, the whole issue in Kurdistan is really of the U.S.'s making, but the U.S. has put itself in a position, the geniuses in Washington, right, the foreign policy geniuses who think they could sprinkle a little here, turn a few knobs here. We have the issue, we're telling the Kurds in Iraq, no, you cannot have your independence, irritating the whole broader Kurdistan, while at the same time, we're telling the Kurds in Syria, hey guys, we need you to fight for us. You don't get to keep the land once you conquer it, because we got to get you back where you belong. We need you to fight. The YPG, the Kurdish group, is really the only significant fighters left in Syria that are allied with the U.S., aside from ISIS maybe. but that's the only significant force. So on the one hand, we're pounding down the Kurds. Hey, don't do this. On the other hand, we're saying, hey, we need you guys. So
if there's not to be a new country, Kurdistan, what else could happen if the international forces would leave them alone? If there was a little bit of understanding that maybe self-reliance and determination could still exist in association, which was the intention of our country, to have these states loosely knit and brought together. That ended, of course, a long time ago. But if that were the case, and there's several countries involved, but like the map that you put up shows that Kurdistan, the Kurdish people, are involved in so many different countries. Maybe there should be a little bit of competition for the countries to be associated with them. Say, hey, look, you associate with us and we'll have a loose alliance. We're not going to disturb you. We're not going to overtax you. We're not going to overregulate you. We'll work out some commercial agreements. And a little bit of competition there among these countries would be something short of the need to have very, very small isolated states, which isn't a bad idea either, but we're not on the verge of that. We're just trying to slow up this building of more, large states, and it seems like once they get hold of it, it's never given up very easily. You know, it's very difficult to reverse that trend. The nature of governments is to expand, not the nature of government to say, you know, maybe we should let this group be self-reliant and independent. That doesn't happen. The people in government, they're there to maintain power, and they enjoy it, and they never get in power. By the time they get in power, they never move in the direction of smaller government. It's always bigger government.
And you know, Assad had some sort of tactical agreements with different Kurdish groups in different areas. You know, don't fight us, you know, and you'll be okay in the end. But you know, that probably is a decent model to you know, to have different autonomies. The other thing that this is doing is potentially creating new alliances, and I think that worries the U.S. as well, because you have Iran, Iraq, and Turkey, the three of them very, very concerned about the Kurds and the Kurdish independence movement. The three of them getting together, and maybe even including post-war Syria, that would also shift the politics of the region, again, an unintended consequence of U.S. interventionism.
Yeah, and of course we can't ignore Russia. You know, Russia is going to have a say in this. They've been very quiet about this, but that would affect them. Look how we have gotten involved, how it has changed over these last couple of years with Syria.
Yeah.
At one time we were moving closer to Russia and trading with Russia, and then once again our foreign policy experts decided that we would participate in a coup. We interfered in a foreign election. Did you know that?
We hacked their election.
The election in Ukraine. We were involved in that, and so things have gotten worse because of those interventions. And to me, it's rather sad. I'm delighted to see the vote, though. I mean, the vote at least is an expression. You know, that's they do a lot of shooting and killing. A lot of people have died over this already.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so the referendum would be one thing, but I think you're right. There's a lot of people have a lot at stake here, and it's not going to go by easily.
And think about the oil. If this independence were to go through and the Kurds were to take the oil-rich region as their own, not sharing any profit with Baghdad, I could see Baghdad just falling apart. That may be one of the reasons that the U.S. is in such panic mode, because if Iraq loses control of that little bit, then what's going to happen? Uncle Sam's going to write a bigger check. What are we going to do?
You know, the difficult argument for us, or explanation for us, is that you suggested that this came about by our foreign policy when we got rid of Saddam Hussein. You know, which is true, but is that what we want? Is that the way we should make up the world? Have more Saddams and Gaddafis around?
That's a good question, yeah.
You know, which is not my favorite thing either. But it is true that you know, some areas of the world have seemed to survive better, you know, with that. But I think the case has to be made ultimately, though, that it's the thuggishness of government, and governments start the war, and the people in power that don't even understand nor care nor endorse the idea of limited government and personal liberty. And that to me has to be the ultimate goal. And you would think, since we were introduced to those views a long time ago and did pretty well with them, that we'd have a little bit more respect for them. And yet today, the conflict in our own country between the cultural Marxists, you know, and the conservative groups,
extreme nationalists,
yeah, the nationalists, and here it is ongoing. It seems to be getting worse, you know, with what's going on with football and everything else, and yet these other movements are going on, and nobody seems to pay a whole lot of attention. Is what are we going to do? You know, one thing I've been thinking about lately with this lack of interest is what's going on in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
I mean,
No
that's part of the United States.
Nobody knows that.
In Puerto Rico, and just total chaos down there. And at the same time, we're worrying about who's going to control the oil valve in Turkish, in Kurdistan, in Iraq.
You made a really good point earlier that's worth considering, because you said things were bad. The assumption that things were better there because Saddam ruled with a heavy hand, and that's really the accusation that a lot of people make toward us. Well, you wouldn't want to get rid of an Assad or a Saddam, but I think the issue is the process. You know, I think tyrannies like the Saddam kind of tyranny, their days are numbered. We saw what happened in Romania with Ceausescu. We see what happens when people have had enough. Where you get into problems is when you have this organic movement of the people toward this kind of reduction of tyrannical power versus a revolution where you don't have the lead up to it. You don't have, the people aren't prepared for it, and you have an outside revolution that changes things, and then chaos comes in. I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, and you can boil it down to something a little simpler than that, is that libertarians could have a viewpoint on how people should run their household. And if they're not running their household very well, you don't have the right to go in, invade their house and say, you should run your household like this. That would be, against the law, and it doesn't work. So in many ways, we march in there and they have problems that they should come internally. And it's true, this fits the argument that most people argue that the government you have can't exist without support from the people. And once the people get fed up with it enough, they usually get rid of it. And that, of course, is always a consequence of beliefs and convictions. It's also the reason why it's a contest in ideas. And ideas are a lot more powerful than weapons, even though it's hard to believe that is the case. But most weapons are based on ideas that are wrong, that we have this obligation to use guns and march around the world telling people how to run their lives and run their country.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you have a summary statement?
The final one would be, and this is probably in support of your idea that the vote is a good thing, and just because I like to see Washington's follies exposed. The U.S. wants to run everything. They want to run this. So here's a State Department spokesman. Here's what she said about the referendum. You're going to laugh. The referendum is all the more unnecessary given the alternative path that has been prepared and endorsed by the U.S. and the international community.
Oh, they already have a plan.
They already have a plan. What are you guys doing your own thing for?
Well, that means that what we're dealing with is the concept of individual liberty protected and encouraged by government versus empire. We're dealing with empire, and empires are willing to tell lies and use force to maintain it, and they get power and through force, and then they have to tell a lot of lies, and more lies that has to be told, and that's what happens. So we use the force and we use the lies to maintain an empire. The problem is empire, and that can only be reversed by changing the people's attitude to understand that their salvation is not in government, no matter what the government officials say. The people in Venezuela and Zimbabwe and different places, they cannot, expect to be taken care of forever. I think that what we have to understand is authoritarianism doesn't work, empire doesn't work, and individual liberty does, and we should apply those principles across the board. We've been introduced to these views. They've been around for a long time, but we always think there's a free lunch, and there's always enough people who can be talked into the idea that a free lunch is available, and they go along with it until we go broke. And that, of course, is what my prediction is the country is broke. The acknowledgement of this has not quite happened, but there will be a day when America will have to say, we have to pull back. We don't have the wealth. We're not producing. There's too many poor people versus the rich people, and they will turn against it. When all the wealth gravitates to a 1% to 5% of the people and the rest aren't doing well, our system won't last either. And of course, our goal here at the Liberty Report is to offer a suggestion on what it should be replaced with, and it shouldn't have another or reformed central bank or reforming and dictating how we're going to deliver goods and services and how government is going to run medical care and education. No, what we want to present here is a non-interventionist foreign policy and something that will defend personal liberty. That is the road to peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.